I went to my son's house for a celebration dinner, carrying a gift I had saved for years. Everyone else was served steak lobster and fine wine. Then my daughter-in-law carried a plastic plate of spoiled leftovers to my seat and announced loudly in front of 60 guests, "The fresh food is for people who actually helped this family." When I looked at my son, he only sighed and told me not to make it into something bigger than it was. I left without a word, but by Monday morning everything had changed. Before we go any further, if this story is already pulling at something inside, you hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge Dad. Then drop a comment. Where are you watching? From your city? Your country? I want to know, who is in this room with me? This story contains fictional elements crafted for reflection and entertainment. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson inside it is not. My name is Richard Hale. I am 61 years old, and the night my son handed me a plate of spoiled leftovers in front of his dinner guests, I did not say a single word. I simply reached into my jacket pocket, felt the weight of the watch I had carried there all evening, and made a decision that would change everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the party first. Ethan had called me on a Thursday afternoon, his voice bright with the kind of excitement I had not heard from him in years. "Dad, we got the Malibu contract. The resort development $40 million. We're throwing a small celebration Saturday night. Just close partners, a few friends, some family. You have to come." I told him I would be there, and I meant it. I spent Friday evening in my workshop, sanding the last edges off a small wooden pickup truck I had been building for my grandson Noah. 4 years old and obsessed with construction vehicles, the boy was my son's son, in that way at least. I wrapped it carefully in brown paper, tucked it under my arm Saturday evening alongside a bottle of 1998 Napa Valley Cabernet. I had been saving for a genuinely worthy occasion, and drove the 40 minutes from my house in Pasadena to Ethan's place in Bel Air. I also carried something in the inside pocket of my jacket, something I had been waiting to give Ethan for 3 years. My grandfather had carried that watch through the Second World War, wounded every morning in a foxhole in northern France, and brought it home without a scratch. My father pressed it into my palm the morning I broke ground on my very first construction project, a 4-unit apartment building in Glendale that I built with 2 workers and borrowed equipment. "You earned this," he told me. "Now go build something that lasts." I had been waiting for the right moment to pass it to Ethan. I thought that night was going to be it. When I pulled up to the house, I could hear the music from the driveway. The backyard was strung with warm Edison bulbs that swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the smell of grilled prime rib and garlic butter drifted all the way to the front gate. I counted at least 60 people from the driveway alone. Not exactly the intimate gathering Ethan had described, but I let it go. My son had reason to celebrate. I had barely stepped through the side gate when I heard a small set of feet pounding across the patio stones. "Grandpa." Noah launched himself at my knees with the full force of a 4-year-old who had no concept of momentum or the structural limitations of elderly kneecaps. I grabbed him before we both went down, swinging him up against my chest and feeling his little arms lock around my neck. His hair smelled like sunscreen and birthday cake frosting. "Hey, buddy." I held him tight for a moment longer than I probably needed to. "I brought you something." His eyes went enormous when I handed him the brown paper package. He tore into it with both hands, and when the wooden truck appeared, he let out a shriek of pure joy that turned heads across the entire patio. "A twuck, Grandpa, it's a twuck." That was the best moment of the evening. It was also the last good one. I set Noah down and watched him sprint back toward the lawn, holding the truck above his head like a trophy. Then I looked around for Ethan. My son was across the yard deep in conversation with 2 men in sport coats who had the polished, easy confidence of commercial real estate developers. He glanced up when I entered, caught my eye, and raised one hand in a brief wave before turning back to his conversation. I understood. He was working the room. I could wait. What I was not prepared for was Vanessa. My daughter-in-law materialized at my elbow with the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes. She was dressed in a jade green cocktail dress, her dark hair pinned up perfectly, a champagne flute dangling from 2 fingers, like a prop, in a performance she had been rehearsing all week. "Richard?" She looked me up and down, then glanced at the wine bottle in my hand, with the faint expression of someone inspecting produce they had no intention of buying. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "Ethan invited me," I said simply. She gestured vaguely toward the far end of the patio near the kitchen door, where a white plastic folding chair sat slightly apart from the long, catered tables. "The main tables are full. You can sit over there." I looked at the chair, then I looked at the tables where Ethan's business partners and their wives were settling into cushioned garden seats in front of plates piled with thick-cut brisket-grilled lobster tails and roasted vegetables glistening with herb butter. I looked back at the plastic chair. I sat down, because I was raised to choose my battles carefully. 10 minutes later, Vanessa reappeared. She was carrying a plastic plate, the disposable kind you buy in bulk at a warehouse store, and she set it in front of me with the theatrical deliberateness of someone who wanted to be watched. On the plate, 3 slices of grayish roast beef curling at the edges, a mound of mashed potatoes with a sour smell that reached me before she even set the plate down, and a small heap of salad that had gone limp and translucent. Several people nearby glanced over. I saw their eyes move from my plate to the lobster tails on the table beside us. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Vanessa crossed her arms and spoke at a volume carefully calibrated to carry. "Leftovers from earlier in the week, still perfectly fine. The fresh food is for the people who actually helped Ethan build what we're celebrating tonight." She paused, letting the implications settle over the patio like smoke. "You've been holding on to your money and your company so tightly for so long, Richard. The least you can do is let the people who earned it enjoy the good food." A man to my left shifted uncomfortably in his chair. A woman across the table suddenly found her wine glass extremely interesting, and from somewhere to my right I heard a single sharp laugh, low, brief, and male. I turned toward it. Grant Doyle was standing near the outdoor bar, a bottle of craft beer in one hand. 38 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled a room without trying. He wore dark slacks and a fitted button-down, the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he was watching Vanessa with an expression that sent a cold, quiet signal through every instinct I had developed in 6 decades of reading people. That was not the look of a man watching his best friend's wife cause a scene. That was the look of a man watching someone he knew very well do exactly what they had planned to do. Before I could process that fully, I heard footsteps and looked up to find Ethan crossing the patio toward us. My chest loosened slightly. My son had seen what happened. He was coming to address it. Ethan stopped beside Vanessa's shoulder. He looked at the plate. He looked at me. And then he did the thing that hurt more than anything Vanessa had said. He sighed. "Dad," he said, his voice carrying the particular tone of a man who has decided before the conversation even begins that he is tired of it. "Don't make this into something bigger than it is. Vanessa has been preparing for this party all day. Can you just eat something and enjoy the evening?" The air went out of me like a slow puncture. "Is that what you see here, son?" I asked quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened. He glanced at the nearby guests, then back at me, and I could see in his face that his primary concern in that moment was not what had just been done to me. It was who was watching. I reached into my jacket pocket. My fingers found the watch, the familiar weight of it, the worn edges of the case, the small engraving on the back that my grandfather had put there in 1943. I held it for a moment. Then I took my hand out of my pocket. Empty. I stood up from the plastic chair, picked up the wrapped wooden truck Noah had left on the edge of the patio when he ran off to play, and walked to the side gate. I set the truck down carefully against the fence post where Noah would find it. "Good night, Ethan," I said. My son did not come after me. I drove home on the 110 freeway with both hands on the wheel and the city lights spreading out on either side of me like a circuit board running at full power. My chest ached with something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Pasadena, the ache had settled into something colder and much more precise. I knew exactly what I was going to do Monday morning. I did not sleep much that weekend. Saturday night, I sat in my study until past 2 in the morning, not reading, not working, just sitting in the leather chair. My wife Eleanor had picked out 23 years ago from an antique dealer in Pasadena. The wood was dark walnut, the leather worn soft at the armrests, and whenever I could not find solid ground in my own head, that chair had a way of reminding me what solid felt like. Eleanor had been gone 4 years, pancreatic cancer fast and merciless, the kind that gives you a diagnosis and a timeline in the same appointment. She would have known what to do about Ethan. She always knew what to do about Ethan. She had a gift for seeing our son clearly without loving him any less for what she saw, and I had never fully developed that particular skill. Sunday, I drove out to the job site in Burbank just to walk the ground. An old habit. Whenever my mind was too loud, my feet needed to move on something I had built. By Monday morning, the noise had settled into clarity. Dorothy Simmons, Dot, as everyone who worked for me called her, had been running my household for 22 years. She was 67 years old, originally from Savannah. Georgia built like a woman who had spent her life refusing to be pushed around and possessed of a moral compass so finely calibrated it could detect dishonesty from across a dinner table. She had been with me longer than most of my business partnerships, longer than several of my contractors, and through the 4 years since Eleanor died, she had become the closest thing I had to family in that house. She found me at my desk at 6:15 Monday morning, already on my second cup of coffee, and set a fresh mug down next to the one I had nearly finished. "You look like a man who spent the weekend making a very large decision," she said, pulling the curtains open so the early Pasadena light came flooding across the oak floor. "I did," I told her. Dot settled herself into the chair across from my desk, the one I kept there for conversations that mattered. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at me with those steady brown eyes that had seen me at my best and my worst, and apparently intended to keep showing up, regardless. "You going to tell me what happened at that party?" she asked. I told her. All of it. The plastic chair, the leftover food, Vanessa's voice calibrated to carry Grant Doyle's laugh, and the moment Ethan sighed and told me not to make it into something bigger than it was. When I got to the part about the watch, Dot pressed her lips together so tightly the color went out of them. "Lord have mercy," she said quietly. Then after a moment, "You didn't give it to him." "No." "Good." She exhaled through her nose. "Richard, I remember the day that boy was born. You called me from Cedars-Sinai at 4 in the morning because Eleanor had gone into labor 6 hours earlier, and you'd been at a job site in Torrance all day trying to keep a foundation from failing in the rain. You drove 40 miles in that storm, and you made it with 12 minutes to spare." She shook her head slowly. "That boy has no idea. No idea at all." "That's partly my fault," I said. "I never told him." "Why not?" I thought about it for a moment. "Because I wanted him to believe he had built something himself. A man who thinks he's standing on his own 2 feet works harder than a man who knows there's a net underneath him." I turned my coffee mug in my hands. "I made a choice. I'm not asking for credit." Dot looked at me for a long moment. "And now, I said, "I'm going to stop being the net. Before I tell you what that meant, let me explain something. Ethan never knew, something I had been carefully keeping from him for 10 years, for reasons that seemed sound at the time, and now felt like the longest mistake of my life. When Ethan launched Hale Pacific Contractors 8 years ago, the company had a good name, a willing workforce, and almost no credit history of its own. Banks do not loan 8 figures to a 30-year-old with 3 years of project management experience, regardless of his last name. So I made a quiet arrangement through my holding company, Hale Holdings LLC, with Marcus Reed acting as the sole intermediary between my personal guarantee and the bank's loan officers. Ethan never saw my name on those documents. He saw Hale Holdings, which could have meant anything, and he never dug deeper because he trusted his CFO to manage the banking relationships, and his CFO managed them exactly as I had arranged. Over the next decade, I signed personal guarantees on 4 separate credit facilities, totaling nearly $18 million. I absorbed 2 of Ethan's early project losses through quiet adjustments to intercompany billing that his accounting team never flagged. And 3 weeks before his Malibu resort celebration, I had sent a letter of financial assurance to Pacific Coast Commercial Bank on Hale Holdings letterhead, personally backing the $6 million construction draw that made the entire $40 million contract possible. He thought he had earned that contract on his own merits. He had earned the relationships, the reputation, and the work ethic. But the financial architecture underneath it, that had been mine. I had built him a bridge and never told him the bridge existed. At 8 o'clock Monday morning, Marcus Reed walked through my front door carrying his leather briefcase and the expression of a man who had learned long ago not to ask unnecessary questions before he understood the full situation. Marcus was 58, a former federal prosecutor who had spent 12 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles before moving to private practice. He was lean and precise, with silver-framed glasses and the habit of going completely still when he was thinking hard, like a machine diverting all available power to a single process. I had trusted him with the most sensitive mechanics of my business for 15 years. He sat down across from my desk, set his briefcase on the floor beside his chair, and looked at me. "Talk to me," he said. I told him what I needed. Terminate all personal guarantees extended through Hale Holdings LLC on behalf of Hale Pacific Contractors. Withdraw the letter of financial assurance to Pacific Coast Commercial Bank. Discontinue the equipment sharing agreement that allowed Ethan's crews to draw from my company's tool inventory and vehicle fleet. Redirect any client referrals originating from my relationships back to Hale Holdings directly. Marcus listened without writing anything down. He didn't need to. His memory was one of the things I paid for. When I finished, he took his glasses off and set them on the desk with a small, precise click. "Richard," he said carefully, "withdrawing the guarantee on the Pacific Coast draw will trigger a review clause in the loan agreement. They will almost certainly pause disbursement within 72 hours. Ethan's Malibu timeline depends on that draw clearing by the end of the month." "I know," I said. "The insurance premium adjustment alone will cost his company roughly $40,000 in the next billing cycle." "I know that too." Marcus looked at me steadily. "Is there anything you want me to try to soften?" I picked up my coffee mug, found it empty, and set it back down. "No," I said. "I don't want it softened. I want it done exactly as I described through proper legal channels with full documentation of every withdrawal. If Ethan's company can stand on its own, it will, and if it can't—" I stopped. "Let the sentence sit there." Marcus finished it for me. "Then he needs to know that." "Yes," I said. "He does." Marcus put his glasses back on and reached for his briefcase. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and uncapped his pen. "I'll have the withdrawal letters drafted by noon and begin the bank notification process this afternoon. Legally, they'll need to process the guarantee withdrawal before taking any action on the loan, so you're probably looking at Wednesday or Thursday before Ethan's team feels the first effect." I nodded. Marcus paused with his pen above the paper. "You understand this may damage the relationship." I looked out the window at the old oak tree in my front yard, the one Eleanor had planted the year we moved in. It had been a sapling, then barely shoulder height. Now it threw shade across half the front lawn. "Marcus," I said, "the relationship was damaged Saturday night. I'm just the only one who knows it yet." He wrote that down. I don't know why, but he did. It took exactly 72 hours for the first wall to crack. I was in my workshop Thursday morning, running a plane along the edge of an oak board I had been meaning to finish for weeks, when my phone buzzed against the workbench. I looked at the screen. Ethan. I set the plane down, wiped sawdust from my hands with a shop rag, and let it ring 3 times before I picked up. "Dad!" His voice was tight in a way I recognized immediately, the controlled tension of a man trying very hard not to sound as rattled as he was. "I need to talk to you." "I'm here," I said. "Pacific Coast Commercial called this morning." A pause. "They're pausing the draw on the Malibu contract. Something about a guarantor withdrawal from Hale Holdings. They're invoking a review clause in the loan agreement, and they need me to Dad." "What did you do?" I set the shop rag on the workbench and leaned against the wall. Through the workshop window, I could see the oak tree in the front yard, the morning light cutting through its branches in long yellow lines. "I withdrew my personal guarantee on your credit facilities," I said. "All of them." Marcus sent the formal notifications Monday afternoon. The silence on the other end lasted about 4 seconds. Then Ethan's voice came back, and the controlled tension was gone, replaced by something rawer and louder. "You pulled my bank guarantee over a dinner plate." His voice cracked on the last 2 words. "Dad, I have 48 workers on payroll. I have a steel delivery scheduled for the 15th that requires a deposit I cannot cover without that draw clearing. I have an insurance renewal coming up that was priced based on Hale Holdings backing. If that falls apart, I'm looking at a $40,000 premium increase overnight. Do you understand what you've done?" "I understand exactly what I've done," I said. "Then explain it to me." His voice was rising now, spilling over the edges of whatever composure he had started the call with. "Because from where I'm standing, my father just blew up my company because his feelings got hurt at a party. I let him finish. I had learned over 61 years that a man saying something untrue loudly does not make it true, and that correcting him mid-sentence only makes him louder. When the line went quiet, I said, "You told me Saturday night that it was your house, your company, your life. Do you remember saying that? That's completely different, and you know it." "I don't think it is," I said. You told me where the boundaries were, Ethan. I'm respecting them. Your house, your company, your life. I'm not interfering with any of those things. I'm simply no longer subsidizing them. And subsidizing. The word came out like I had struck him with it. You think what you've been doing is subsidizing me. I built Hail Pacific from the ground up. I built the client relationships. I built the team. I put in the hours you think signing a piece of paper somewhere entitles you to. Son, my voice came out quieter than I intended, and somehow that quietness stopped him faster than volume would have. I signed more than a piece of paper, but this is not the conversation for right now. Right now I want you to hear one thing. What? His breathing was audible over the line, fast and shallow. I stopped building bridges for people who pushed me off theirs. The line went so quiet I could hear the ambient noise of his office, the hum of an HVAC system, a phone ringing somewhere down the hall, the distant sound of someone closing a heavy door. That is, Dad, that is the most self-righteous thing you have ever said to me. His voice had dropped, now gone cold and precise in the way it did when he was truly angry rather than just startled. Vanessa made a poor choice with the food, I get that. But you are burning down a $40 million project and putting 48 people's livelihoods at risk because of a bad dinner. That is not a father protecting his dignity. That is a man throwing a tantrum. Something moved in my chest when he said that. Not anger I had expected. Anger had steeled myself for it. It was something closer to grief, the particular grief of watching someone you love look directly at the truth and describe it as something else entirely. Call your insurance broker today, I said, and talk to your CFO about the steel delivery deposit. You have options, Ethan. You just have to find them yourself. I ended the call before he could respond. I stood in my workshop for a long time, after that hand flat against the workbench, looking at nothing in particular. The oak board sat in the vise where I had left it half-planed waiting. I thought about Eleanor again, the way she could sit across from Ethan at a dinner table and see every version of him at once, the boy he had been, the man he was, and the man he still might become. She never lost sight of any of those three at the same time. I had only ever been able to hold one at once. What happened next, I did not learn until much later, pieced together from what Ethan eventually told me, and what Daniel Cross's investigation later confirmed. Ethan drove home from the office that afternoon and told Vanessa everything. He sat at their kitchen island, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug. He was not drinking from his voice flat with exhaustion, and he laid it out, the guarantee withdrawal, the bank review, the insurance renewal, the steel deposit, the 10-day deadline from the resort development partner. And Vanessa, who had been leaning against the counter with her arms crossed and her expression carefully arranged into something resembling concern, let him finish. Then she straightened up, walked around the island, put both hands on his shoulders, and looked him directly in the eye. He did this on purpose, she said. Her voice was soft, but it had an edge underneath it like a blade wrapped in cloth. Richard has been waiting for a reason to prove that you can't survive without him. Don't you see that he doesn't want you to succeed, Ethan? He wants you to need him. That's always been what this is about. Ethan shook his head. Vanessa, listen to me. Her hands tightened on his shoulders. He has been holding this over you for years. Every time you got close to something real, something genuinely yours, he found a way to insert himself. The insurance arrangements, the client introductions, the way he always seemed to know which banker to call. You thought that was support. It was control. She leaned in closer. He will never let you be your own man as long as he has financial leverage over you. The only way this stops is if you take it away from him. Ethan's jaw worked. His eyes were red at the corners, the way they got when he was fighting something he did not want to feel. What are you saying? He asked. I'm saying call him back, Vanessa said. Tell him to restore the guarantee. Tell him that if he is serious about being your father, he acts like one. And if he refuses, she paused, then at least you'll know exactly where you stand. He called me back 40 minutes later. His voice had changed again. The rawness was gone, replaced by something more deliberate, more constructed. The words had the particular cadence of things that had been suggested to him recently. Dad, he said, I need you to restore the Hale Holdings guarantee by end of business Friday. If you're serious about being part of this family, you do this. That's all I'm asking. I looked out my workshop window at the oak tree. The morning light had shifted to afternoon, the long yellow lines gone flat and gray. No, I said. Then we have nothing more to discuss. His voice was steady, final the way a door sounds when someone closes it with both hands. Don't call me until you're ready to act like a father. The line went dead. I set the phone face down on the workbench. Then I picked up the hand plane and went back to work on the oak board, running the blade along the grain in long, slow strokes until the wood was smooth enough to reflect light. That night, 20 miles outside the city, in a room neither Ethan nor I knew existed, yet a conversation was taking place that would make everything that had happened so far feel like the opening move of a game none of us had agreed to play. What I am about to tell you, I did not witness. I learned it later, piece by piece, through Daniel Cross's investigation, through phone records, through things Ethan eventually told me, when he was finally ready to tell the truth. I am putting it together here, the way a builder reads a structure after it has already collapsed, tracing each crack back to where it started. The motel was called the Sunrise Inn. It sat on a 2-lane road in Chatsworth, 22 miles northwest of Bel Air, far enough from the city that nobody who mattered would recognize a car in the parking lot. Vanessa had been there before. The room was already paid for when she arrived. Grant Doyle was waiting inside. He was leaning against the dresser with his arms crossed and a bottle of bourbon on the nightstand beside him, still wearing the dark slacks and button-down from the party. He had loosened his collar, but not removed it the way a man does when he wants to appear relaxed without fully committing to it. Vanessa dropped her purse on the bed and turned to face him. "He cut everything," she said. Her voice was not panicked. It was the voice of a woman recalculating fast and precise, the way a contractor reprices a bid when the materials cost doubles overnight. "The bank called Ethan this morning. The guarantee is gone, the draw is frozen, the insurance renewal is going to cost him $40,000 he doesn't have." Richard moved faster than I expected. Grant picked up the bourbon bottle and poured 2 glasses without being asked. He handed one to Vanessa and kept his eyes on her face. "How did Ethan take it? He's furious." She accepted the glass, but didn't drink. He called Richard twice. Richard didn't budge. She looked at Grant directly. "We need to move faster. If Ethan's company collapses before we have anything in place, we lose all leverage." Grant swirled the bourbon in his glass slowly. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered with the particular stillness of a man who had spent years learning how to project authority without raising his voice. He was currently a lieutenant with the LAPD, and actively campaigning for sheriff of Los Angeles County, a campaign built entirely on a public image of integrity, community service, and family values. He had been seeing Vanessa for 5 years. "A financial dispute won't touch Richard Hale," Grant said finally. "The man has Marcus Reed on retainer and enough capital reserves to outlast any commercial lawsuit we could generate. You'd be fighting him on his own ground with his own weapons." He set his glass down and looked at her. "But there's another kind of pressure, the kind that doesn't go through a courtroom first." Vanessa's eyes sharpened. "What kind?" "The kind that goes through the news cycle." Grant's voice was measured, each word placed carefully. "A child welfare allegation against a wealthy, powerful man that destroys a reputation before a single piece of evidence is tested. Before his lawyers can file a motion, before Marcus Reed can make a single call, the story is already out there. And once it's out there," he paused. "It doesn't matter what the investigation finds. The damage is done." Vanessa set her glass down on the nightstand. Her hands were steady. "Noah's wrist," she said. Grant nodded slowly. "The bruise from the playground. You told me about it Sunday." "He fell off the slide," Vanessa said, "about an hour before Richard arrived." "I know." Grant held her gaze. "But Richard was at the party. He was agitated. Several people saw him stand up abruptly and leave." He tilted his head slightly. "Perception is a very malleable thing, Vanessa, especially when the person shaping it is the child's mother." The room was quiet for a moment, except for the low drone of the air conditioning unit beneath the window. Vanessa looked at the glass on the nightstand. Then she looked at Grant. "You would handle the report?" she asked. "I would handle everything on the department side," he said. "The intake, the assignment, the evidence documentation. I know every procedural lever in that system. I've been pulling them for 15 years. Vanessa exhaled through her nose. Something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, not hesitation, but the particular focus of someone who has just found the load-bearing wall in a structure they intend to take apart. "And if Richard fights back?" she asked. Grant almost smiled. "Let him. A grieving grandfather denying he hurt a 4-year-old boy, that's not a good look, no matter how many lawyers he has." Vanessa picked up her glass and finally took a drink. When she lowered it, her jaw was set and her eyes were clear. "Set it up," she said. Grant reached for his phone. 2 days later, he knocked on my front door. I heard the doorbell at 10:15 on a Saturday morning. Dot was in the kitchen making her weekly batch of cornbread, and I was at my desk reviewing a set of revised blueprints for a warehouse project in Glendale when she appeared in the doorway of my study, wiping her hands on her apron, with an expression I had not seen on her face before, something between confusion and a feeling she could not yet name. "There's a police officer at the door," she said, "and a woman with a clipboard." I set my pencil down. Grant was standing on my front porch in full LAPD uniform, pressed Navy shirt badge on his chest, catching the morning light service weapon holstered at his hip. Beside him stood a woman in her mid-40s wearing a gray blazer and carrying a manila folder pressed against her chest. She had the carefully neutral expression of someone trained to observe without reacting. "Grant," I said. "Mr. Hale." His voice was formal, clipped entirely different from the man who had laughed at my expense 2 weeks ago in Ethan's backyard. He was performing a role now, and he was performing it well. "This is Sandra Mitchell from the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services. We're here regarding a report filed concerning your grandson Noah." My hand tightened on the doorframe. "What kind of report?" Sandra Mitchell stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Hale, a formal complaint was submitted to DCFS on Thursday, alleging that you physically harmed Noah during a family gathering on Saturday the 14th. Specifically, that you grabbed his wrist with sufficient force to cause bruising." She opened the manila folder and turned it to face me. Inside was a photograph, Noah's small wrist, a dark bruise encircling it like a shadow. "We're required by California law to investigate all reports of this nature, regardless of the relationship between the parties." I looked at the photograph for a long moment. My chest felt like something had reached inside it and grabbed hold. "That child was in my arms for 30 seconds when I arrived," I said, keeping my voice level with every ounce of discipline I had. "He ran to me at the gate. I picked him up. I handed him a gift. That was the entirety of my physical contact with Noah that evening." "Can you tell us approximately what time you arrived at the residence?" Sandra asked, her pen moving across her notepad. "Shortly after 5, I said. 5:10, 5:15. She wrote that down without expression. I looked at Grant. He met my eyes steadily, professionally, with absolutely nothing behind them. The man who had stood in that backyard and laughed was completely gone, replaced by something colder and more deliberate. "Danst," I said quietly, "did anyone at that party actually see me touch that child in a harmful way?" He held my gaze for precisely 2 seconds. Then he looked down at his notepad. "We're not able to discuss the specifics of witness statements at this stage of the investigation, Mr. Hale." My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my back teeth. Sandra Mitchell explained that DCFS would be conducting a formal investigation, that I would be contacted for a full interview within the week, and that in the meantime, a request for a temporary restraining order had been submitted to the Los Angeles County Family Court by Noah's mother. A judge would review the request, and if granted, a process server would deliver the official order. They left 12 minutes after they arrived. I stood on my porch and watched Grant's patrol car pull out of my driveway, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time, the particular cold of being genuinely cornered. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, a process server had delivered the TRO to my front door. The order signed by a family court judge prohibited me from any contact with Noah, pending the outcome of the DCFS investigation. I read it twice, standing in my foyer, Dot watching from the kitchen doorway, with her arms wrapped around herself, like she was trying to hold something in. "They used that baby," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her eyes were burning. "They looked at that little boy and saw a tool. Lord in heaven, Richard, they used that child." I folded the TRO carefully and set it on the entry table. "I know," I said. By 7 o'clock that evening, Vanessa's video was everywhere. Dot found it first on her phone and brought it to me in the study. Without saying a word, just set the phone on my desk and stepped back. On the screen, Vanessa was sitting on what appeared to be a pale linen sofa. Noah asleep against her shoulder, her eyes red and swollen, in the way of someone who has been crying for hours, or knows exactly how to appear as though they have. "I stayed quiet for so long," she said to the camera, her voice catching precisely where it needed to catch. "Because I was afraid. When you're dealing with someone who has that much money and that much influence, you learn very quickly that speaking up has consequences. But I cannot keep watching my son carry the mark of what was done to him and say nothing. She went on for 4 minutes and 32 seconds. She did not mention the dinner. She did not mention the withdrawn bank guarantee or the insurance premium or the steel deposit. She spoke only of a grandfather who had lost his temper, a child who did not understand why he was hurting, and a mother who was terrified of what came next. The comments came in the thousands within the first hour. I read approximately 40 of them before I stopped. Not because they hurt, though, some of them did in the way that a blade hurts more when you did not see it coming, but because reading them was not useful. Being angry was not useful. Feeling sorry for myself was not useful. What was useful was thinking clearly. I was still thinking when my phone buzzed the following morning with a notification from a local news channel. Ethan was on television standing in front of his office building on Wilshire Boulevard, Vanessa, beside him with one hand on his arm and Noah on her hip. The reporter asked him whether he believed his father had harmed his son. Ethan looked at the camera. His eyes were red at the corners. He pressed his lips together for a moment, and in that moment I saw the boy he had been at 8 years old, standing in my workshop watching me work, asking me questions I did not always have time to answer. "I love my father," Ethan said, "but my first responsibility is to protect my family. If what my wife says is true, then my father needs to be held accountable like anyone else would be." The reporter pressed him. "Did you personally witness the incident?" Ethan's jaw moved. "I trust my wife," he said. I watched the broadcast from my desk chair, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. When it was over, Dot came in from the kitchen, looked at my face, and walked straight to the bourbon cabinet without asking. She poured 2 glasses, set one in front of me, and dropped into the chair across the desk. "Tell me you have a plan," she said, her voice rough with something that was not quite anger and not quite tears, but lived right between them. I picked up the glass. "I'm working on one," I said. "Eleanor used to say I was most dangerous when I was most calm." She said it the first time after watching me handle a subcontractor who had been skimming materials from a job site in Culver City. A man twice my size who had expected shouting and threats, and instead got a quiet conversation and a termination letter that had clearly been drafted before he walked into the room. She watched him leave and turned to me with that particular look. She had equal parts admiration and wariness, and said, "Richard Hale, you are a genuinely frightening man when you decide to be." I thought about that Sunday evening as I sat at my desk and pulled up Daniel Cross's contact information on my phone. I had known Daniel for 11 years. We had met through a mutual contact at a commercial litigation firm in Century City. Daniel had been wrapping up his final year with the FBI's Los Angeles field office, where he had spent a decade working public corruption and financial crimes cases. When he went private, he took with him the kind of institutional knowledge that money cannot buy and law school cannot teach. He knew exactly how people inside systems hid things, because he had spent his career finding them. I dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring. "Richard Hale," he said. "I was wondering when you'd call." "You saw the news?" I said. "Saw it, read it, and spent about 20 minutes being angry on your behalf." His voice was dry and direct, a man comfortable with unpleasant facts. "What do you need?" "I need the truth about what happened at that party," I said. "All of it. Where it started, who built it, and how they built it. I don't want theories. I want evidence." A brief pause. "You think this was constructed?" "I know it was constructed," I said. "I just need you to find me the blueprints." Daniel arrived at my house at 8:30 that evening, driving a gray Chevy Tahoe that looked like every other gray Chevy Tahoe in Los Angeles, except for the reinforced door locks and the secondary battery system he had installed himself. He was 45, lean with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of face that did not give much away, not unfriendly, but watchful in the way of someone who had spent years in rooms where the wrong expression could change an outcome. Dot brought coffee to the study without being asked, set it on the desk. Between us looked at Daniel once with the evaluating eye of a woman who trusted her instincts more than references, and apparently decided he passed because she left without a word. Daniel opened a slim notebook on his knee. "Walk me through the evening," he said. "Everything you remember in order, without editing." I did. From the moment I arrived at the gate and Noah ran to meet me to the plastic chair. The food Grant's laugh, Ethan's sigh, the watch I did not give the drive home. Daniel listened without interrupting his pen, moving steadily. When I finished, he looked up. Grant Doyle handled the intake personally. "He was there himself," I said, "with the DCFS investigator." Daniel's pen stopped. "A lieutenant doesn't respond to child welfare calls. That's not how it works. Beat officers do intake sometimes, a detective if there's a criminal angle being pursued simultaneously. A lieutenant showing up in person? He shook his head. That's a choice. That's somebody pulling a favor or calling one in. Or somebody who needed to be there to control what got documented, I said. Daniel looked at me for a moment. How well does Ethan know Doyle? They were roommates at USC, I said. Grant has a key to their house. Something moved behind Daniel's eyes, not surprise exactly, but the recognition of a pattern clicking into place. He wrote something in the notebook and underlined it twice. I want to start with a party footage, he said. Guests with phones, neighbors with security cameras, anybody within visual range of that backyard between 3 and 6 Saturday afternoon. If there's footage of Noah before you arrived, we find it. He paused. I'll need to go through the county system to get proper subpoena coverage so nothing gets challenged on chain of custody later. I have a contact at the California DOJ who can expedite. Whatever it takes, I said. Daniel closed the notebook and looked at me steadily. You want me to find the truth, or do you want me to build a case? I picked up my coffee. Find the truth first, I said. If it's what I think it is, the case will build itself. He nodded and stood. At the door of the study, he paused with one hand on the frame, looking back at me with the expression of a man about to say something he has weighed carefully. A chart, he said. Whoever put this together knew exactly what they were doing. A child welfare allegation, a sympathetic video, a social media campaign that's not improvised. That was planned before the party ended. He held my gaze. This goes deeper than a bruised wrist. I think you already know that. I do, I said. He left. I heard the front door close, heard Dot's footsteps cross the kitchen, heard the house settle back into its evening quiet. I looked at the photograph of Eleanor on my desk. Her eyes looked back at me with that particular steadiness she had carried, even at the end, even when the diagnosis had taken everything except her clarity. I'm going to need your patience on this one, I told her. The photograph did not answer, but somehow that was enough. Daniel Cross called me on a Friday afternoon, 6 days after he had sat in my study, and told me this went deeper than a bruised wrist. I was on the job site in Glendale when my phone buzzed a text. First 2 words, call me. I stepped away from the crew, found a quiet stretch of chain link fence at the edge of the property, and dialed him back. He picked up before the first ring finished. I found something, he said. You need to come to the office. I was there in 40 minutes. Daniel's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Colorado Boulevard in Pasadena, deliberately unremarkable, the kind of address that does not announce itself. The waiting room had 2 chairs and a ficus that had seen better decades. The inner office was different. 3 monitors, 2 filing cabinets with combination locks, a whiteboard along one wall covered in names and dates connected by lines and 3 different colors of marker. My name was at the top. Grant Doyle's was circled in red. Daniel was standing at the center monitor when I walked in. He had the focused, slightly compressed energy of a man who had not slept much and did not particularly care. He pointed to the chair across from his desk without looking up. Sit down, he said. This is going to take a few minutes to walk through. He had spent 6 days working the subpoena through his contact at the California Department of Justice, a former colleague from the FBI field office who now ran the DOJ's Southern California Investigative Liaison Unit. The subpoena had given Daniel legal authority to request security footage from any residence or business within visual range of Ethan's backyard during the relevant time window, 2 in the afternoon to 7 in the evening on the day of the party. 7 households responded. 5 had cameras pointed at streets or driveways and captured nothing useful. 1 had a camera aimed at their own backyard pool and caught only the corner of Ethan's fence line. The 7th was a family named Kowalski, who lived directly behind Ethan's property on the adjacent street. Their camera, a wide-angle unit mounted under their back porch, Eve was aimed at their vegetable garden, but the angle was wide enough to capture the full length of Ethan's playground area, including the wooden play structure with the yellow slide that sat against the shared fence. Daniel pressed play. The footage was time-stamped, and high-resolution shot in the clear afternoon light of a California summer Saturday. For the first 2 minutes, there was nothing: empty grass, the corner of a blue plastic sandbox, the slide catching the sun. Then, at 4:18 and 22 seconds, Noah appeared at the top of the slide. He was moving fast the way 4-year-olds move when they have been told not to and have forgotten why, all momentum and no caution. He hit the bottom of the slide at an angle, his left arm catching the metal edge of the frame as he tumbled off, and he went down hard onto the rubber mat below his small body, folding in on itself in the way that makes every parent's stomach drop, even when the child is fine. He was not fine. He lay there for 3 full seconds, long enough that I leaned forward in my chair, without meaning to, my hand pressing flat against Daniel's desk, before he pulled himself up and began to cry. Vanessa came through the back door 11 seconds later. She crossed the yard at a pace that was urgent but not panicked, crouched beside Noah, turned his left wrist in both hands, looked at it for a long moment, and then gathered him up and carried him inside. The timestamp read 4:19 and 8 seconds. Daniel paused the footage. He looked at me. My throat felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with anger. I had been a grandfather for 4 years. I had watched that child take his first steps on the hardwood floor of Ethan's living room, had caught him. When he wobbled, had felt his small fingers grip my index finger with the absolute trust of someone who has not yet learned that the world contains people who will use him as a chess piece. He fell, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. He fell almost an hour before I got there. 4:18, Daniel said. Your car is visible on the street camera at the front of the house at 5:12, 54 minutes later. He let that number sit in the air between us for a moment. Then he pulled up a second window on the monitor. That's not the whole story. He showed me an email chain. The sender was identified as Edward Kowalski, the homeowner. The recipient was Grant Doyle's LAPD department email address. The message was sent at 6:47 on the evening of the party, approximately 90 minutes after Grant had presumably left with the other guests. The subject line read, "Thought you should see this the Hale situation." Attached to the email was the footage file. The same footage Daniel had just shown me. Daniel pulled up a third window, a server access log obtained through the DOJ subpoena. It showed that Grant Doyle's department credentials had been used to open the attached file at 8:53 that same evening. He had watched it. Then Daniel opened the DCFS investigation file obtained through a separate DOJ request and scrolled to the evidence log. The footage from the Kowalski camera was not listed. It had never been submitted. It did not exist in the official record of the investigation against me. My hand on the desk curled slowly into a fist. He watched a video that proved you never touched that child, I said, and he buried it. The technical term, Daniel said, his voice careful and precise, is obstruction of justice under California Penal Code, Section 135, destruction or concealment of evidence. It is a misdemeanor at minimum and a felony if prosecuted in conjunction with the underlying fraud. He paused. But here is what matters for our purposes right now. I have the original email from Kowalski. I have the server log showing Grant opened it. I have the DCFS evidence log showing it was never submitted. That is a documented time-stamped chain of concealment. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me steadily. I am going to recommend we take this to the California Department of Justice directly, he said. Not LAPD Internal Affairs. Grant has too many relationships there. The DOJ has independent investigative authority over local law enforcement misconduct. My contact there has already been briefed in general terms. He is expecting my call. Make it? I said. Daniel reached for his phone. Then he stopped and looked at me with an expression I had not seen from him before, something that was not quite pity and not quite admiration, but existed somewhere between them, the look of a man who has delivered difficult news to a lot of people and still finds some cases harder than others. Richard, he said, when I show you what I found in the financial records next week, and I will find something, because there is always something, when a man like Grant Doyle takes this kind of risk, I need you to be prepared for the possibility that this was never just about your money. I looked at the paused image on his monitor. Noah at the bottom of the slide arm, bent at the wrong angle, face crumpling toward tears. It was about eliminating me, I said. Daniel nodded once. Make sure you're ready for what that means. He picked up his phone and dialed. Before I tell you what Ethan signed that Thursday and what was hidden inside those 41 pages, drop a 1 in the comments, so I know you are still with me, because what comes next changes everything, and I do not want you to miss it. A reminder, this story contains fictional elements crafted for reflection and entertainment. If that is not what you came for, no hard feelings, you are free to step away at any time. What I am about to describe, I did not learn until later. I am placing it here because this is where it happened, running parallel to Daniel's investigation, invisible to me, unfolding in the house my son had built his life inside. The pressure on Ethan that week was the kind that does not announce itself as pressure. It arrives dressed as solutions. Vanessa started on a Monday morning, 3 days after the video went live, and the comment sections were still churning. She came downstairs while Ethan was on his second cup of coffee, and his third unanswered email from the resort development partner set her hands flat on the kitchen island across from him, and looked at him with the expression she had perfected over years of marriage. The one that said, "I have been thinking about this all night and I need you to hear me." "Grant knows someone," she said. "An investment group out of Nevada. They're called Northridge Partners. He says they've been looking for a California construction project to anchor a new portfolio, and the Malibu resort fits exactly what they want." Ethan looked up from his laptop. "What's the structure?" "They put in $8 million, Vanessa said. "Enough to cover the draw gap, the insurance renewal, the steel deposit, and give you a 12-week runway while the bank situation gets sorted out." She paused. "The condition is that they want security. They want to pledge a future equity in Hale Holdings as collateral." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't own equity in Hale Holdings. My father owns Hale Holdings." "Not yet," Vanessa said. "But Grant's legal contact says that if Richard's position becomes untenable, if the board loses confidence in him, or if the DCFS investigation creates enough reputational damage that the other shareholders push for a leadership transition, the voting rights would transfer to the next of kin." She held his gaze. "To you." Ethan pushed back from the island and stood up. His hands were pressed flat on the counter, his shoulders rigid with the effort of a man trying to think clearly through a fog of exhaustion and fear and the particular desperation of watching something he built begin to come apart at the seams. "You're asking me to bet my father's company on a lawsuit that we manufactured," he said. His voice was low and strained barely above a murmur. Vanessa's expression did not flicker. "I'm asking you to protect what you've spent 10 years building," she said quietly. "Richard made his choice when he pulled that guarantee. He chose his pride over his family. We're choosing differently." Ethan said nothing, but he did not walk away. The documents arrived Thursday, a thick envelope delivered by courier, the return address a legal firm in Henderson, Nevada. Ethan sat at his home office desk and went through the first 6 pages carefully, then the next 4, more quickly, then the remaining 11, at the pace of a man who was looking for reasons to sign rather than reasons not to. He found the signature lines. He picked up his pen. His hand was trembling slightly, not from doubt, but from the specific physical exhaustion of someone who has been holding something heavy for too long and has finally decided to set it down, regardless of where it lands. He signed. While Ethan's pen moved across those pages, Daniel Cross was sitting in a coffee shop on Lake Avenue in Pasadena. His laptop open, working through the financial subpoena, results his DOJ contact had pushed through overnight. He called me at 6 that evening. I was in my workshop not working, just standing with my hand on the workbench the way I did when I needed the solidity of something I had built myself. "Northridge Partners," Daniel said without preamble. "Registered in Nevada under a holding structure that traces back through 2 layers of nominee directors to a man named Curtis Prewitt. Curtis Prewitt is Grant Doyle's brother-in-law. He has no construction industry experience, no investment history, and his personal checking account had a balance of $400 before Northridge was incorporated 14 months ago." My hand tightened on the workbench edge. "It's a shell," I said. "It's a shell," Daniel confirmed. "And the transaction pattern over the past 14 months, money in from 3 different source accounts redistributed through 4 sub-entities before landing in what appear to be personal accounts. That pattern has a name, Richard. Federal prosecutors call it structuring. It fits the predicate for a RICO filing if we can show the enterprise was ongoing and coordinated." He paused. "Grant has been running this for over a year. Ethan's company is not the first. It's just the biggest." I looked at my hand on the workbench. The knuckles were white. "How long before Ethan feels the consequences of whatever he just signed?" I asked. "Depends on what he signed," Daniel said. "But if Northridge follows its established pattern..." He stopped. "Richard, you need to prepare yourself. Whatever comes next is going to come from inside your son's own company." He hung up. I stood in the workshop until the light outside the window went from gold to gray to dark, thinking about a boy who had signed papers he did not read, and a bridge I had stopped building and all the space in between. This part of the story I know from Ethan himself. He told me later in the way a man tells things when he is no longer trying to protect anyone, not even himself. I am repeating it here, as close to his words as I can manage. Carol Hutchins had been the chief financial officer of Hale Pacific Contractors for 11 years. She was 55 years old, originally from Knoxville, Tennessee, the kind of woman who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and kept a framed photograph of her 3 golden retrievers on the corner of her desk, and had absolutely no patience for numbers that did not add up. She had survived 4 different economic downturns, 2 ownership transitions, and 1 catastrophic materials theft that had nearly bankrupted the company's predecessor entity. And in all that time, she had never once called Ethan at home, unless something was genuinely wrong. He picked up on the 3rd ring on a Tuesday morning, standing in the kitchen in his running clothes, one hand on his coffee mug. "Ethan," she said, "I need you to come in before the rest of the staff arrives. 8 o'clock. Don't tell Vanessa." The last 3 words hit him like a hand on the chest. He set his coffee mug down carefully so it would not rattle against the counter. "Carol!" "8 o'clock," she said, and hung up. She was waiting for him in her office when he arrived, the blinds drawn and a single file folder open on her desk. She did not offer him coffee. She did not ask how he was doing. She slid the folder across the desk and looked at him over the top of her reading glasses with an expression that was equal parts sorrow and steel. "There is a wire transfer I cannot account for," she said. $420,000, moved from the Malibu project operating account to an entity called North Ridge Consulting on the morning of the 14th. The authorization bears your digital signature." Ethan's stomach dropped. He looked at the transfer document. His signature, the electronic certificate tied to his name and credentials, was right there at the bottom of the page, time-stamped at 6:41 in the morning. "I didn't authorize this," he said. His voice sounded strange to him, too flat, like a man reading words off a card. "Carol, I did not send this transfer." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said quietly. "That is why I called you before I called anyone else." Ethan drove home in a state of controlled panic, the kind where your hands work the steering wheel and your eyes track the road, and the entire interior of your chest feels like it has been hollowed out with a cold instrument. He walked through the front door of his house and found Vanessa at the kitchen island laptop, open a green smoothie beside her elbow. He put the transfer document on the counter in front of her. "Someone used my digital signature to move $420,000 out of the Malibu account," he said. "The transfer went to North Ridge Consulting. Carol found it this morning." Vanessa looked at the document. Then she looked up at him, and her expression was so perfectly calibrated. The right amount of shock, the right amount of concern, the eyes slightly wider than normal, that something in Ethan's chest registered it as a performance before his mind had fully caught up. "This has Richard written all over it," she said. "He has access to Hale Holdings systems. If he wanted to sabotage the North Ridge deal—" "Richard doesn't have access to my operating accounts," Ethan said. "Hale Holdings is a separate entity. The systems don't talk to each other." Vanessa's expression shifted barely a millimeter of recalibration and then settled back. "Then someone who works for him. He could have hired someone to—" "Vanessa." His voice came out sharper than he intended. She stopped. Ethan picked the document up off the counter and took it to his home office. He sat at his desk and opened the company's cloud storage audit trail, a secondary logging system the IT team had installed after the materials theft 3 years ago, designed to track every login, every file, access every document modification, with a time-stamped record that ran independent of the main operating system. He typed in the date of the transfer, the 14th. The log returned 43 entries for that day. Most were routine staff accessing project files during business hours, a automated backup running at midnight, a system diagnostic at 1:45 in the morning, and then at 2:11 in the morning, a login. The credentials belonged to Vanessa, not to her official company account. She did not have one, had never been an employee. These were credentials attached to a secondary access profile that had been quietly created 8 months ago under a vendor management sublicense, the kind of low-visibility account that did not appear on the main user directory. Ethan stared at the screen. His hands were very still on the keyboard, the way hands go. Still when the body understands something the mind is still catching up to. He went to the doorway of his office. Vanessa was in the kitchen, her back to him, still at the island. Why were you logged into my company system at 2 in the morning on the 14th? He asked. She turned around, the smoothie glass was in her hand, and she looked at him with the expression she always used when she was about to redirect, chin slightly down, eyes soft, voice dropping into the register she used when she wanted him to feel that he was being unreasonable. I don't remember being logged in, she said. I barely remember that night. I was exhausted. Maybe I pulled something up on my phone by accident, or the system auto-synced. You told me you were at your mother's that night, Ethan said. In San Diego. Something crossed her face. Too fast to name, too real to miss. I was, she said. I'm just saying the system could have. Her house is 120 miles from my office, Vanessa. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The system must have glitched, she said finally. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. His jaw ached from clenching it. Then he turned around, walked back to his desk, sat down, and did not say another word to her for the rest of the day. He did not call me. He did not call Carol. He did not call Grant. He sat at his desk with his hands on his knees and stared at the 2:11 timestamp on the audit trail until the numbers blurred at the edges, and he felt the first cold crack run through the foundation of everything he had chosen to believe. A deleted file is not gone. Ethan had learned that years ago, sitting in a digital forensics seminar that Hale Pacific's insurance carrier had required all senior staff to attend after the materials theft. The instructor, a former Secret Service agent who had pivoted to cybersecurity consulting, had spent 40 minutes explaining that deletion was in most operating systems a fiction. The file was not removed. The space it occupied was simply marked as available. Until something else was written over it, the original data remained waiting to be found by anyone who knew where to look. Ethan had not thought about that seminar in 3 years. On Thursday morning, while Vanessa was at a yoga class she attended every week from 9 to 10:30, he drove to a technology consulting firm on Lake Avenue in Pasadena, 3 blocks from Daniel Cross's office, though he did not know that, and asked to speak with their forensic data recovery specialist. The specialist was a 29-year-old named Trevor Ames who wore a Caltech pullover and had the focused, slightly impatient energy of someone whose mind moved faster than most conversations. Ethan explained what he needed without explaining why he needed it. A forensic copy of the hard drive from the office workstation Vanessa had accessed, and a full recovery pass on any deleted files from the past 8 months. Trevor looked at him for a moment. You want me to find something specific or see what's there? See what's there, Ethan said. It took Trevor 4 hours. He called Ethan at 2:15 in the afternoon with a voice that had lost its impatience and picked up something quieter and more careful. You need to come back in, he said. Ethan sat across from Trevor's workstation and watched him navigate through a recovered directory tree folders and files that had been deleted in a single batch operation 8 days ago. The digital equivalent of sweeping everything off a desk into a trash can and then emptying the can. Most of it was mundane cached browser files, duplicate document versions, a folder of photographs. But in a subfolder labeled with a string of random numbers and letters, the kind of name generated automatically by software rather than typed by a human, Trevor found a document. It was a contract, 41 pages formatted with the letterhead of a Nevada law firm that Ethan did not recognize. The title page read, Investment and Management Agreement, Northridge Partners, LLC, and Hale Pacific Contractors, Inc. Ethan's hands were cold as he scrolled through it. Pages 1 through 38 were standard investment agreement language representations and warranties, disbursement schedules, reporting requirements. He had seen similar documents dozens of times. He turned the pages quickly looking for the section that had made someone feel the need to delete this file. He found it on page 39. The heading read, Section 14, Indemnification and Liability Allocation. He read it once. Then he read it again more slowly, his finger tracing the lines on the screen the way his father had once shown him to read blueprints following each line to its end before moving to the next, making sure nothing was missed. The language was dense and technical, but its meaning was not complicated. In the event that any financial irregularities, unauthorized transfers, or fraudulent transactions were identified in connection with the Hale Pacific operating accounts, during the term of this agreement, the signatory officer of Hale Pacific, meaning Ethan, would bear sole and personal liability for any civil or criminal consequences arising from those transactions. Vanessa, listed as independent transaction advisor to Northridge Partners, would receive a consulting fee of $3 million upon successful completion of the investment agreement and subsequent management transition. There was a final clause on page 41. It was 2 sentences long. It specified that upon execution of the management transition, the independent transaction advisor retained the right to relocate permanently and was released from any ongoing obligations to Hale Pacific, its officers, or its affiliates. Ethan sat back in the chair. Trevor was looking at the far wall, giving him the privacy that the moment clearly required, his hands folded in his lap, with the careful stillness of a young man who had recovered enough deleted files to understand that what people hid was usually worse than what they showed. "She was going to take $3 million, Ethan said. His voice did not sound like his own voice. It sounded like something being read from a document. "And I was going to take the criminal liability." Trevor did not say anything. He did not need to. Ethan thought about the 48 workers on his payroll whose names he knew. He thought about Carol Hutchins, who had called him before she called anyone else and told him not to tell Vanessa. He thought about the pen in his hand 3 days ago and the way his fingers had been trembling, not from doubt, he had told himself, but from exhaustion. He understood now that it had been doubt. He had felt it and overridden it, and the consequences of that choice were printed on 41 pages of Nevada legal formatting sitting on a screen in front of him. He pulled out his phone. He looked at his father's contact information for a long time, the name, the number. The small photograph his phone had auto-assigned from an old company directory photo that made Richard look more stern than he actually was in person. He did not call. Not yet. He needed one more thing first. He needed to understand who Vanessa had been doing this for, because the contract told him what she was taking, but it did not tell him where she was going. He thanked Trevor, paid in cash, took the encrypted USB drive containing the forensic copy, and walked out into the Pasadena afternoon with his jaw set and his eyes burning, and the specific hollow feeling of a man who has just read the last page of a book and understood that the story he thought he was in was never the story at all. He drove home. He parked in the driveway. He sat in the car for 11 minutes before he went inside. My father used to say that when you finally stop making excuses for someone, the truth does not arrive all at once. It settles over you slowly, the way cold water does when you step into it inch by inch, each new degree of cold, a small shock your body adjusts to until you are completely submerged and you realize you have been adjusting to something unbearable for so long that you forgot what warmth felt like. Ethan told me later that he understood this on a Friday evening, sitting in a rented Nissan he had picked up from an Enterprise location on Colorado Boulevard, specifically because Vanessa did not know the car. She had told him at dinner that she was going to spend the evening with her friend Melissa in Silver Lake. She said it the way she said most things, with the particular ease of someone who had rehearsed the sentence enough times that it no longer required effort. She kissed him on the cheek, picked up her purse, and was gone by 7:15. Ethan waited 4 minutes. Then he got in the Nissan and followed her. He kept 3 cars between them on the 10 freeway, then 2 on the surface streets as she moved northwest through Hollywood, then 1 as she turned onto Sunset Boulevard and the traffic thinned. He had never followed anyone before in his life. His hands were damp on the steering wheel, and his heart was hammering against his ribs with a rhythm that felt wrong, too fast, and too loud, like an engine running at the wrong RPM. She pulled into the parking lot of a place called the Hillcrest Motor Inn, a 2-story structure set back from Sunset, behind a row of mature eucalyptus trees, the kind of establishment that asked for cash and did not put its name on the receipt. Ethan pulled to the curb 100 yards back, cut his headlights, and watched through the windshield. Vanessa parked near the stairwell. She did not go to the front office. She walked directly to the 2nd floor, 3rd door from the left, and knocked twice. The door opened. Grant Doyle was standing in the frame, in dark jeans and a gray Henley, and the way he reached for her, both hands going to her face, her arms going around his neck. The particular ease of 2 people whose bodies knew each other very well landed in Ethan's chest like a structural collapse. Not a crack this time, a failure. The kind that does not announce itself until the moment the floor is gone. He raised his phone and recorded 30 seconds of footage through the windshield. His hand was shaking badly enough that he had to brace his elbow against the door panel to keep the frame steady. Then the door closed and they were gone, and the parking lot was just a parking lot again, ordinary and indifferent under the amber glow of a sodium lamp. Ethan sat in the car for a long time. He thought about the first time he had introduced Grant to Vanessa, a rooftop party in West Hollywood, 7 years ago, the summer before Ethan proposed. He thought about Grant standing at the edge of the rooftop, with a beer in his hand, laughing at something Vanessa had said, and Ethan thinking how good it felt to have his two favorite people in the same place getting along so naturally. 7 years. He picked up his phone and opened the shared photo storage album that he and Vanessa had maintained since they started dating 8 years of dinners and vacations and holidays, and the ordinary daily accumulation of a life together. He typed Grant's name into the search function, not expecting it to return anything, the way you check a room you are fairly certain is empty, just to confirm the certainty. It returned 43 photographs. Most were group shots, parties, barbecues, the kinds of images where Grant appeared in the background or the edge of the frame, the way any mutual friend would. But as Ethan scrolled backward through the years, the photographs changed. Grant moved from the background to the foreground. The group shots thinned out. And then, in a cluster of images dated 5 years ago, a year before Noah was born, there were photographs of Grant and Vanessa alone. A restaurant Ethan did not recognize. A hiking trail he had never been on with her. A photograph taken on what appeared to be a hotel balcony overlooking the ocean. Vanessa leaning back against the railing with Grant beside her, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. She had left these in the shared album. Either she had forgotten they were there, or she had never imagined Ethan would think to look. His thumb stopped on an image dated 4 years and 8 months ago. Vanessa was sitting on a cream-colored sofa, one hand resting on the visible curve of a pregnancy she was carrying at what looked like 5 or 6 months along. She was smiling at the camera. Grant was beside her, his right hand covering hers on her stomach. Noah had been born 4 years and 3 months ago. The air inside the Nissan felt suddenly thin, like the cabin pressure had dropped without warning, and Ethan pressed his back against the seat and breathed through his nose in the deliberate way his high school wrestling coach had taught him. In for 4 counts hold, for 4, out for 4. Because it was the only technique he could remember that had ever reliably stopped the sensation of the world tilting out from underneath him. Noah. He thought about Noah's face when he concentrated on something, the way his brow furrowed exactly the way Ethan's did. Or so Ethan had always assumed the way fathers assume the children who look up at them are somehow made from the same material as themselves. He thought about teaching Noah to throw a baseball in the backyard 3 months ago, the boy's small arm winding up with more enthusiasm than accuracy, both of them laughing when the ball went sideways into the rose bush. He thought about the wooden truck his father had left by the gate the night of the party. He thought about Richard standing in that backyard holding a watch he had carried all evening, and decided not to give walking out without a word while the music played and the people laughed and the lights swayed in the summer air. He drove home at 11:40. He parked in the garage and went upstairs and stood in the doorway of Noah's room for a long time, watching the boy sleep, one arm thrown over his head, the wooden truck tucked under his chin like a stuffed animal, his small chest rising and falling, with the total unconscious peace of a child who does not yet know that the adults in his life are capable of what the adults in his life are capable of. Ethan's eyes burned so badly he had to press the heels of both hands against them to keep from making a sound. Then he went to his office, sat down at his desk in the dark, and opened Vanessa's message archive. There are things you read that you cannot unread. Not because the words are complicated, or because the meaning is ambiguous, or because you need to read them twice to understand what they say, but because the moment you finish the last sentence, you understand that the person you were before you started reading no longer exists, and there is no mechanism in the human body for going back. Ethan found the messages at 12:41 in the morning on an iPad that had been sitting on the kitchen counter for 2 years. The family device logged into the household Apple account, syncing automatically with every phone and computer on the network. It had been syncing with Vanessa's phone for 2 years. She had simply never thought to check what it was holding. The message thread was buried under 14 months of ordinary traffic grocery lists and contractor quotes and school enrollment paperwork for the preschool they had toured in March. He almost missed it. The contact was listed under a name that meant nothing VR property management. A business name. The kind of label designed to look like a vendor if anyone glanced at the screen. He opened it. The earliest message in the thread was dated 4 years and 9 months ago. Vanessa had sent a photograph. A black and white image, slightly grainy, the unmistakable geography of an ultrasound. A small curved shape suspended in white static, the size and position consistent with a pregnancy at roughly 16 weeks. Below the photograph, she had written 4 words. It's yours. Now what? Grant's response had come 11 minutes later. I can't do this publicly. I'm 3 months out from the lieutenant exam, and I've got the sheriff campaign in planning. If this gets out, it ends everything. You need to handle it. Ethan read the word handle and felt something happen in his chest that he did not have a name for. Not anger, anger would have been cleaner. This was something that moved through him like cold water, finding cracks filling every space. Vanessa had written back, "And if I tell Ethan, Grant, tell him it's his. He'll believe you. He always believes you." Ethan sat with that sentence for a long time. He always believes you. 4 words. The entire architecture of the last 4 years built on 4 words written by a man who had stood in his kitchen and eaten his food and bounced his son on his knee and known the entire time exactly what he had done. He scrolled forward through the months. The messages were not frequent sometimes, weeks apart, then clusters of daily exchanges when something required coordination. He read them in order. The way you read something you already know is going to be terrible, but cannot stop the way you press on a bruise to confirm it is real. He read about the night Noah was born. Grant had sent a single message at 2 in the morning. "Everything okay?" Vanessa had responded. "Boy, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Ethan is in the hallway crying. He thinks it's his." Grant had not replied until morning. When he did, he wrote, "Better that way. Keep it that way." He read about the first time Grant had come to the house after Noah was born. A Sunday afternoon, Ethan had been at a job site in Burbank, and Grant had come over ostensibly to drop off a baby gift. In the message thread, Vanessa had written to him afterward, "You held him. I watched your face. I know it's hard, but this is the only way this works." Grant had written back, "Does he look like me, Vanessa?" Around the eyes. Grant, "Okay." Just that. "Okay." The words sitting there on the screen like a door being closed. Ethan scrolled to the messages from 3 weeks ago, the night of the party after Richard had left. Vanessa, he pulled everything. The bank, the insurance, the equipment. Ethan is falling apart. Grant, good. That's what we needed. Move to the next phase. Vanessa, you sure about the boy's wrist? Grant, it's a bruise. Kids get bruises. Nobody's going to look too hard if the mother is crying on camera and the grandfather is rich and difficult. Trust me, I know how this works from the inside. Vanessa. And after Grant. After Richard loses his position and the company restructures, we pin the transfers on Ethan. He'll be buried in legal proceedings for 2 years, minimum. By the time anything gets resolved, you and I are somewhere else. Vanessa, Noah comes with me. Grant, obviously, he's mine. Ethan read that last line 3 times. He's mine. He set the iPad face down on the desk. Then he picked it up again because he needed to read one more thing, the most recent message sent 4 days ago. After Ethan had signed the Northridge documents. Vanessa, he signed everything, all of it. He didn't read past page 6. Grant, perfect. Give it 2 weeks. Then we move. Vanessa. I already looked at flights. Miami has good schools. Grant booked them. One way. Ethan put the iPad down again. He pressed both palms flat on the desk and leaned his weight forward onto them and breathed the way his wrestling coach had taught him in hold out. But this time, the technique did not work. Because this time, what he was trying to contain was not panic or adrenaline, but something older and deeper and heavier than both of those things combined. He thought about 4 years of mornings. Noah padding into the kitchen in his pajamas, climbing onto the counter stool, asking for cereal, with the particular focused urgency of a small person for whom cereal is the most important thing in the world. Ethan lifting him down, getting the bowl. Listening to the boy talk about whatever was in his head, trucks, dinosaurs, a caterpillar he had seen in the backyard, the color blue, the way shadows worked. 4 years of a boy who had looked at him and known, without being told that this was the person who would catch him if he fell. He's mine, Grant had written. Ethan thought, you weren't there for a single morning. He sat in the dark office for a long time. The house was quiet around him, Noah asleep down the hall, Vanessa in the master bedroom, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary house that was not ordinary at all. Then he stood up. He went to the bedroom closet and pulled out the gray duffel bag he used for weekend trips. He set it on the bathroom floor and looked at it for a moment. Then he put it back. He was not leaving. Not yet. Not before he did what needed to be done. He picked up his phone. He found his father's number. His thumb hovered over the call button for a full 30 seconds, the screen glowing in the dark hallway. He pressed call. It rang 4 times. Then Richard's voice came on rough with sleep, but immediately alert in the way of someone who has spent decades being called at bad hours about things that could not wait. Ethan. Ethan opened his mouth, his throat locked. He pressed his fist against his sternum and breathed. Dad, he said finally, his voice coming out, stripped of everything except the truth. I need to see you, tonight, right now. A pause, 3 seconds. I'll leave the gate open, Richard said. It was raining by the time Ethan reached Pasadena. Not the dramatic cinematic rain of disaster movies. No thunder, no lightning, no wind bending the trees sideways. Just the steady gray, indifferent rain that Southern California produces a few times a year. The kind that falls straight down without apology and turns the freeway reflective and makes the orange groves along the 210 look like something painted on glass. He pulled up to my gate at 2:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been watching the security monitor on my desk, since his call tracking the camera feeds in the order a man tracks things when he is waiting for something he has been waiting for longer than he realized. I pressed the gate release before his headlights had fully stopped moving. Dot was already in the front hallway when I came downstairs. She had not been asleep, I could tell by the way. She was dressed still in her day clothes, a cup of tea in both hands, steam rising in the cold air of the entryway. She had heard the phone ring. She had decided without being asked that this was a night that required her to be present. She looked at me. I looked at her. Then the headlights swept across the frosted glass panels beside the front door, and she set her tea on the entry table and opened the door before Ethan could knock. He was soaked through. He had walked from his car to my front porch without an umbrella, maybe 40 feet. And in that 40 feet, the rain had done what California rain does when it finally arrives, committed entirely. His hair was plastered flat, his jacket darkened from gray to charcoal water, running from his collar down the back of his neck. He was standing on my porch with his hands at his sides and his chest moving with the slightly too fast rhythm of a man who has been holding something enormous for a very long time and has finally arrived at the place where he can put it down. He looked at me. I looked at him. I did not open the screen door immediately. I want to be honest about that. There was a part of me, not the father part, but the part that had sat in this house for 3 weeks, absorbing the consequences of choices my son had made that needed one more second. Not to punish him, not to make a point, just to be certain in that one extra second that what I was seeing on his face was what I thought it was. It was. I pushed the screen door open. "Dad," he said. His voice came out wrecked, not broken. The way glass breaks cleanly and completely, but the way wood breaks under slow pressure, splintering in multiple directions at once. "You were right. About what?" I asked. He pressed his lips together. His jaw was working the muscles along the hinge of it, visibly tight, the way a man's face looks when he is fighting his own throat for the right to keep speaking. "About everything," he said. "Vanessa, Grant, the company, the money, the..." He stopped, swallowed, started again. "About Noah." That last word cost him something considerable. I could see the price of it in the way his shoulders dropped a half inch when he said it, as if the word itself had weight, and he had been carrying it in his chest all the way from Silver Lake, and only now set it on the ground between us. I stepped back from the door. "Come inside," I said. "But I need you to understand something first. You walking through this door tonight does not erase the choices you made. It does not undo what I watched you do on that television. It does not give back the 3 weeks I spent sitting in this house while your wife told the internet I was a danger to my own grandson." I held his gaze. "You can come inside, but do not expect one conversation to carry the weight of all of that." Ethan nodded. He did not argue. He did not try to explain or justify or qualify. He just nodded, which was the first thing he had done in weeks that reminded me of the boy he had been before. All of this. A boy who, when he was genuinely wrong, had the rare and valuable quality of knowing it without needing to be convinced. Dot handed him a towel without a word. He took it with both hands and pressed it against his face, and when he lowered it, his eyes were red at the rims in a way that had nothing to do with the rain. We went to my study. He sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair Marcus Reed used, the same chair Daniel Cross had used, the chair that had seen more of the mechanics of this situation than any piece of furniture in the house, and he put everything on the desk, the iPad with the message thread, the encrypted USB drive from Trevor Ames with the forensic copy, the phone footage from the Hillcrest Motor Inn parking lot, the photograph from the shared album dated 4 years and 8 months ago, Vanessa's hand, Grant's hand covering it, the curve of a pregnancy neither of them had told the truth about. He laid it all out and then sat back and told me everything. Not in the careful, edited way people tell things when they are managing how they are perceived. In the raw, slightly disorganized way people tell things when they are simply trying to get the truth out of their body and into the air before it poisons them from the inside. He talked for 40 minutes. I did not interrupt once. When he finished, the study was very quiet except for the rain against the window and the sound of dots shifting in the hallway. She had not gone back to her room, I noticed, and I was glad. I looked at my son across the desk. He was looking back at me with his hands wrapped around the mug of tea Dot had pressed into them at some point during his account, holding it the way a person holds something warm when the warmth is the point rather than the drink. The plate of food didn't break me, I said finally. The lawsuit didn't break me. The video, the protesters, the injunction on the business, none of that broke me. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the desk. What broke me was sitting in this room, watching my son look at his father being humiliated in front of 60 people and choosing without hesitating to stand next to the person doing the humiliating. Ethan's eyes filled. He did not look away. He held my gaze while his eyes filled and while the first one spilled over, and while he pressed the back of his wrist against his cheekbone with the controlled, slightly frantic motion of a man who has decided he is allowed to feel this, but has not yet decided he is allowed to show it. "I know," he said. "I know that. And I don't have anything to say that makes it better. I'm not going to try." His voice steadied slightly. "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me fix this, and I understand that fixing it starts with me having to earn back the right to even make that request." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about Eleanor, about what she would say if she were sitting in the chair beside him right now, watching her son hold a mug of tea with shaking hands and tell his father the truth for the first time in weeks. She would not tell me to forgive him. She would not tell me to withhold it. She would look at me with those steady eyes and say, "Richard, look at what he came here to do." I looked at what he had come here to do. "Go sit forward," I said. "Tell me exactly what you have and exactly what you need. We have work to do before morning." Ethan sat forward. He set the mug down. He stopped trying to keep his face arranged into anything in particular, and for the first time in the conversation, he looked not like a man managing a crisis, but like my son, tired and frightened, and 20 years younger than he had seemed when he walked in, and he told me what he knew. We talked until 4:15 in the morning. By the time Dot appeared in the doorway with 2 fresh cups of coffee and the expression of a woman who has decided that sleep is a thing that happens to other people on other nights, we had the outline of something that might, if we were precise and patient, and did not make a single unnecessary move work. Marcus Reed once told me that the best legal trap is the one the target builds for himself. All you have to do, he said, is hand him the right tools at the right moment and then get out of the way. We met in his office Monday morning, Richard, Ethan, Marcus, and Daniel Cross, the 4 of us around the glass conference table, with the city spread out 30 floors below us, and enough documented evidence between us to end 3 careers and 1 marriage before the week was out. Daniel had laid it out in 2 columns on the whiteboard. Left side, what we had. Right side, what we still needed. Left side was substantial, the Kowalski footage, the server log showing Grant opening and burying it, the forensic copy of the Northridge contract with Section 14, the iPad message thread, the wire transfer records, the shell company registration tracing back to Grant's brother-in-law. Enough, Marcus said, to make arrests today. "Then why aren't we?" Ethan asked. His voice was flat and controlled. He had slept 3 hours on my guest room couch, and it showed in the hollows under his eyes. But his jaw was set with a steadiness I had not seen from him in weeks. Marcus took his glasses off and set them on the table. "Because Grant Doyle has 17 years inside LAPD and a network of relationships that runs through every level of the department. If we move now, his defense attorneys will argue improper procedure on the recording evidence, Vanessa will claim emotional coercion from a grieving husband, and the DA will spend 6 months untangling objections before anything goes to trial." He looked at Ethan steadily. "We need them on record. We need them to say it themselves clearly in a format that cannot be challenged." Daniel uncapped his marker and added 1 item to the right column. Recorded confession, CADOJ supervised. "California is a 2-party consent state," Daniel explained, looking at Ethan. "Normally, you cannot record a conversation without the other party's knowledge. But there is a specific exemption when the recording is conducted under the supervision of a state law enforcement agency as part of an active criminal investigation. He tapped the whiteboard. My contact at the DOJ has already obtained an emergency state search warrant from the Superior Court, signed this morning authorizing electronic surveillance in connection with the extortion and public corruption investigation against Grant Doyle. Under California Penal Code Section 633.5, law enforcement may conduct consensual monitoring with one cooperating party once a warrant is in place. The equipment is authorized. All we need is someone on the inside. Everyone looked at Ethan. He looked back at all of us without flinching. Tell me what I have to do. The plan was straightforward. Ethan would return home and tell Vanessa he had gone to see me, which was true, and that he had spent the weekend slowly wearing down my resistance. He would tell her I was close to agreeing to sign, that I was exhausted and isolated, and the public pressure was finally working. He would be warm with her, patient. He would give her no reason to suspect that the man she had been carefully dismantling for 3 weeks had spent Saturday night sitting across a desk from his father, putting her entire scheme on the table. Vanessa would believe it. We all knew she would believe it because she had spent 4 years training herself to read Ethan's doubts as temporary conditions that her management could resolve, and she would read this the same way. Daniel leaned back in his chair. There's one more thing. He pulled a single sheet from the folder in front of him and slid it across the table. I ran Vanessa's credit card activity through the subpoena. She booked 2 seats on an American Airlines flight from LAX to Miami International, departing 6:15 a.m., Thursday. He paused. 4 days from now. One way. The room was quiet for a moment. If we don't move by Wednesday night, Marcus said carefully, they're gone. Ethan picked up the flight itinerary. He looked at it for a long moment. The departure time, the destination. The 2 seats, and something moved through his face that was not anger and not grief, but the particular expression of a man who has finally understood completely and without remainder exactly what he was dealing with. He set the paper down. Wednesday night, he said, set it up. That evening, Ethan drove home in his own car parked in his own driveway, walked through his own front door, and kissed Vanessa on the cheek. I think Dad is close to breaking. He told her, his voice carrying just enough exhaustion to be convincing. I think if we set up the signing this week, he'll do it. Vanessa's face opened into a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She put both hands on his face and looked at him the way she always looked at him when she believed she had won. I knew you could do it, she said. I knew it. Ethan smiled back at her. It was the most honest lie he had ever told. The thing about people who believe they have already won is that they stop being careful. They relax. Their shoulders drop. They pour another drink. And when people truly relax, they start talking, not because they are careless, but because the pressure they have been holding for months finally has somewhere to go, and the release of it feels in that moment indistinguishable from safety. Ethan wore the recording device on Tuesday evening. It was a small transmitter the size of a shirt button adhered to the inside of his left forearm, where his sleeve covered it completely. A CADOJ field supervisor named Hargrove sat in a gray sedan 3 houses down the street, monitoring the live feed on a laptop balanced on his steering wheel. 2 additional DOJ arrest agents, including a woman named Reyes, who would be positioned inside the house, were already briefed and on standby. Grant came over at 7. He brought a bottle of Clase Azul tequila and the loose, expansive energy of a man who has mentally already spent the money. He poured 3 glasses without being asked, dropped onto the living room sofa with his arm along the back, and smiled at Ethan across the coffee table with the particular warmth of a man who believes the person across from him is on his side. To the end of a long road, Grant said, raising his glass. Vanessa raised hers. Her eyes were bright. And a new beginning. Ethan raised his. He did not drink. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. The Malibu Project timeline, a restaurant Grant knew. In Brickell, he said they had to try the weather in Miami in October. Vanessa sat close to Grant on the sofa, not touching, but with the particular proximity of 2 people who have trained themselves over years not to touch in front of witnesses, and have become so practiced at it that the restraint itself is visible. Ethan watched all of this from the armchair across the room, and kept his face arranged into something that resembled the expression of a relieved man, and thought about the transmitter on the inside of his forearm, and breathed. Grant refilled his glass. The tequila was working. His voice had dropped half a register and lost its professional precision, the way voices do when the performance becomes less necessary. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Grant said, swirling his glass. "That old man's face when he finally signs. 3 weeks of freezing his accounts, the protesters outside his building, the video, the investigation." He shook his head with something that was not quite admiration and not quite contempt, but lived between them. "He's tough, I'll give him that, but everybody breaks eventually." Vanessa laughed. "He didn't break. He just finally ran out of options." "Same thing," Grant said. Ethan kept his face still. "He thought I learned that from my father." Vanessa leaned back against the sofa cushions and looked at the ceiling with the satisfied expression of someone reviewing a completed project. "The bruise was just an opportunity." She said, her voice easy and reflective, the way people talk about things that are already over. "If Richard hadn't pulled the money, I never would have needed to use it. He basically handed us the opening." The transmitter on Ethan's forearm felt very warm. Grant nodded slowly. "And the footage from the neighbor I killed, that before it ever touched the file, by the time anyone thought to look for it, it was gone." He set his glass down. "I've been pulling levers in that department for 15 years. I know which ones to pull and which ones to leave alone. Nobody is going to dig into a closed child welfare file on a case that's about to settle." Ethan said, "What about after when Richard's lawyers start looking at the company transition?" Grant looked at him with a patient, slightly patronizing expression of someone explaining something obvious. "By the time his lawyers are looking at anything, we're in Miami and the liability is yours on paper. That's what Section 14 is for." He smiled. "Clean?" Ethan nodded slowly. His jaw ached. Vanessa stood and stretched, rolling her shoulders. "I should check on Noah," she said, and disappeared down the hallway. Grant leaned forward and lowered his voice. "She's been incredible through this whole thing," he said. "Steady, never cracked once." He looked at Ethan with something that might have been in a different universe genuine. "She did all of this for her son, you know, whatever else you might think." Ethan looked at him. "I know," he said. He meant something entirely different by it. 3 days before the signing, Marcus called me into his office. He slid a single document across the glass table without saying a word. It was a report from the California DOJ forensic unit generated as part of the criminal investigation into Grant Doyle. During the search of Grant's personal records under the state search warrant, investigators had obtained a biological sample from a prior paternity filing Grant had quietly submitted to a Nevada family court 2 years earlier, a filing he had never disclosed and never pursued. The lab had cross-referenced it against the child welfare file that bore Noah's name. The probability of Ethan's paternity, 0%. The probability of Grant Doyle's paternity, 99.99%. I sat in my study for a long time after that. Dot came in, looked at my face, and did not ask what the results said. She already knew from the way I was sitting very still, both hands flat on the desk, staring at a point somewhere beyond the window. "Is it done?" she asked. "Almost," I said. She turned to go. At the door she stopped and looked back at me with those steady eyes that had seen every version of this family across 22 years. "Richard," she said quietly, "make sure they feel every bit of it." "I intend to," I said. "Before I tell you what Richard put on that screen in front of every powerful person in that room, drop justice in the comments if you are still here with me. I want to know who made it this far. Some elements of this story are fictional, built to reflect something larger than any one situation. If you would prefer to step away here, that is completely understood. They came into my home expecting a surrender. They had dressed for it. Vanessa arrived in a black cocktail dress with her hair pinned back and the particular brightness in her eyes of someone who has already mentally crossed the finish line. Grant wore his LAPD uniform, press polished, the badge catching the light from my entryway chandelier, because he wanted the room to see. It wanted the weight of it in the air before anything else was said. Behind them came 8 guests, 3 members of my company's board of directors, 2 commercial real estate partners I had worked with for over a decade, Carol Hutchins, and 2 individuals I did not immediately recognize who stood near the back of the group with the careful, slightly removed posture of people who are present for a specific purpose and intend to remain unobtrusive until that purpose requires them. CADOJ investigators. Daniel had placed them an hour before the guests arrived. I had set the living room the way I set a job site before a critical inspection. Everything in its place, nothing accidental. The 85-inch screen on the wall above the fireplace was dark. The room was lit warmly, deliberately, the kind of light that makes people feel comfortable and slightly off their guard. Dot stood in the kitchen doorway with her hands folded in front of her. Ethan sat on the far end of the sectional, close enough to Vanessa to be convincing, far enough from Grant to breathe. Vanessa set the folder on my coffee table before she had fully crossed the room. She dropped it with the satisfied thud of someone who has been waiting to make that gesture for weeks. "Let's not draw this out," she said. "The notary is on the way. You sign, we leave. Everyone moves on with their lives." I looked at the folder. Then I looked at the room, at the board members who had built careers alongside mine at Carol Hutchins, standing near the window with her hands clasped and her reading glasses on the chain around her neck, at Grant positioned near the hallway with his thumbs in his belt and his chest slightly forward, occupying space the way men do when they are performing authority rather than exercising it. Before I sign anything, I said, "I want everyone in this room to understand exactly why I'm surrendering." Grant's eyes moved to me. Something shifted in them, not quite alarm, but the first edge of it. I picked up the remote from the side table and pointed it at the screen. The first image appeared without announcement or introduction. Security camera footage time-stamped the backyard of this house from 4 weeks ago. The warm light of an early summer evening, the long tables, the Edison bulbs, the guests in their good clothes, and Vanessa crossing the patio with a plastic plate in each hand, setting one down in front of me near the kitchen door. While the other tables held brisket and lobster, and things I had not been offered, the room did not make a sound. I let it run for 11 seconds, long enough for every person in that room to understand exactly what they were seeing. Then I looked at Ethan. "That was the moment my family truly broke," I said. Ethan's jaw tightened. He held my gaze and did not look away. The screen changed. The Kowalski footage, time-stamped 4:18 p.m., 54 minutes before my car appeared on the street camera at the front of the house. Noah at the top of the slide, the fall, Vanessa crossing the yard, looking at the wrist carrying him inside. I heard one of the board members draw a sharp breath. The screen changed again. Grant's department email. The message from Edward Kowalski, time-stamped 6:47, the same evening the footage attached. Beside it, the server access log, Grant's credentials opening the file at 8:53 that night. Beside that, the DCFS evidence log, the footage that was never submitted. Grant took one step toward the hallway. "Lieutenant Doyle." The voice came from the back of the room, calm and entirely without theater. One of the two unobtrusive guests had moved to the hallway entrance, his hand resting at his side. "Please stay where you are." Grant stopped. The screen changed. The Northridge wire transfer. $420,000. Vanessa's login credentials at 2:11 in the morning. The forensic trail from Trevor Ames connecting the digital signature to her secondary access profile. Then Section 14 of the Northridge contract enlarged to fill the entire 85 inches. The liability clause. Ethan's name in the indemnification paragraph. Vanessa's consulting fee. The relocation clause on page 41. Vanessa's face had gone the color of old concrete. She was staring at the screen with her lips slightly parted and both hands pressed flat against her thighs, the knuckles whitening as I watched. "That is fabricated," she said. Her voice had lost its cocktail party brightness entirely. What was underneath it was thinner and more frightened. "That document was altered. Richard paid someone to." "Vanessa?" Ethan stood up. She turned to look at him, and something in his face, the particular stillness of it, the absence of the doubt she had trained herself to read there and manage, stopped her mid-sentence. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and set his wedding ring on the coffee table beside her folder. He set it down carefully, without ceremony. "The way you set down something you have been carrying for a long time and have finally decided you are finished carrying. Nothing in this room," he said quietly, "is faker than this marriage." Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes went to Grant, standing frozen near the hallway with both DOJ investigators now positioned between him and the door. Grant looked back at her, and for the first time in the entire 4 weeks of this ordeal, he had nothing to offer her. No lever to pull, no procedure to invoke, no authority to project. He looked exactly like what he was. The screen filled with audio waveforms, the CA-DOJ recording from Tuesday evening. The timestamp and supervisor certification, visible at the bottom of the frame. The room heard Grant's voice relaxed and precise. "I killed that footage before it had ever touched the file. Then Vanessa's the bruise was just an opportunity. Carol Hutchins pressed her hand over her mouth. One of the board members stood up and quietly moved to the far wall. I set the remote down on the side table and looked at the two people who had spent 4 weeks dismantling my life with the focused efficiency of people who believed they would never be held accountable for it. Grant reached for his radio. The DOJ investigator was faster. Grant Doyle had spent 17 years making sure other people ran out of options. He had built his entire career on the architecture of consequence, on knowing which door to close, which file to bury, which conversation to have before the wrong person had it first. He had walked into rooms with a badge and a uniform, and the particular gravitational authority of a man who has never in his professional life been on the wrong side of the handcuffs. He found out what that felt like at 8:47 on a Wednesday evening in the living room of my house in front of 8 witnesses while still wearing his LAPD uniform. Agent Reyes, the DOJ arrest agent Hargrove's team had placed inside the house an hour before the guests arrived, was already positioned near the hallway entrance compact and deliberate, the kind of presence you would not notice until the moment she needed to be noticed. Moved across the room in the time it took Grant to register that his hand had not reached his radio. She had his right arm behind his back before he fully understood what was happening, and when his left arm came up in instinct, her partner was already there. Grant Doyle. She said, her voice carrying the flat procedural calm of someone who has done this many times and has learned that calm is more frightening than force. "You are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." Grant's face did not collapse the way Vanessa's had. It contracted, went inward, every muscle tightening simultaneously the way a structure looks in the second before it fails. He did not struggle. He had enough professional instinct left to understand that struggling in uniform in front of witnesses with a DOJ badge in his face was a calculation with no favorable outcome. He looked at Vanessa. She was already looking away. Ethan had not moved from where he stood beside the coffee table. He was looking at the space between the floor and the door, and his hands were at his sides, and the expression on his face was the one I had last seen on him when he was 11 years old and had broken a window with a baseball and stood in the yard waiting for me to come outside, not defiant, not apologetic, just entirely still, with the weight of something that could not be undone. Vanessa turned to him. Her cocktail dress, which had looked so precisely chosen 3 hours ago, seemed suddenly wrong on her, the brightness of it jarring against the gray that had settled into her face. "Ethan," her voice cracked on the single syllable. She took one step toward him, then stopped when he did not move. "Ethan, please. I did this for us, for Noah. Everything I did because I was trying to build something that would last." "Don't," he said. Just that word, flat and final, the way a door sounds when the latch catches. She tried again, her voice climbing toward something that might become tears. "You know me. You know who I am. Whatever those recordings sound like, whatever you think you saw." "I know exactly who you are," Ethan said. He looked at her then, directly for the first time since the screen had come on. "That's the part that took the longest. Knowing who you are." Agent Reyes' partner had moved to Vanessa's side. She looked at the handcuffs with the expression of someone who has imagined many outcomes, but not this one. And then she looked at me across the room, standing beside the fireplace with my hands in my pockets, and her expression shifted into something that might have been an appeal. I looked back at her without expression. "Richard," she said. "Good night, Vanessa," I said. She was still talking when they walked her out. I listened to the sound of the front door closing, then the sound of car doors, then the sound of the street returning to its ordinary Wednesday evening, quiet. A neighbor's dog, somewhere a car on the avenue, the distant thrum of the city doing what cities do, regardless of what happens inside any particular house. The board members began to make their careful exits. They shook my hand with the slightly dazed formality of people who have witnessed something they will be describing for years and have not yet decided how. Carol Hutchins stopped beside me on her way out, pressed my hand between both of hers without saying anything, and left. Dot appeared from the kitchen and began gathering glasses without being asked. Ethan sat down on the sectional. He sat the way very tired people sit, not leaning, not settling, just stopping his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, his shoulders rising and falling, with the slow rhythm of someone who has been holding his breath for a very long time and is only now in the particular silence after an enormous thing remembering how to let it go. I sat down beside him, not close enough to crowd him, just close enough that he would know I was there. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his face pressed into both hands, his shoulders moving with the slow, uneven rhythm of someone learning how to breathe again after holding everything in for too long. "Dad," he said, his voice muffled against his palms. I put my hand on his shoulder, once brief steady, then took it away. "I know," I said. He looked up. His eyes were red and raw and entirely without pretense. "I'm sorry," he said. I know it doesn't." He stopped, started again. "I am sorry." I looked at my son for a long moment, the boy who had run to me in my workshop asking questions I did not always have time to answer, the man who had stood on television and said he trusted his wife, the person sitting beside me now who had driven through the rain to my front gate at 2:47 in the morning and said, "You were right about everything." "I know you are," I said. We sat there together until Dot finished with the glasses. 2 weeks later, I sat in the fourth row of courtroom 14 at the Los Angeles County Superior Court on Hill Street and watched Judge Patricia Owens take the bench. She was 62 years old, silver-haired with the kind of face that had stopped performing patience somewhere around the 15th year on the bench and had settled into something more economical attention without theater authority, without announcement. She reviewed the plea agreements and the sentencing recommendations without visible reaction. Then she looked up at the courtroom over the rim of her glasses. "This court has adjudicated a great many financial fraud cases," she said. Her voice was the same flat, carrying calm as Agent Reyes's, the voice of someone for whom the gravity of a proceeding does not require additional emphasis. "But the deliberate use of a child's injury as a mechanism of legal coercion against an innocent family member is among the most calculated acts of cruelty I have encountered in 30 years on this bench." She looked at Vanessa. "The court accepts the plea agreement, 6 years federal facility, mandatory restitution of all fraudulent transfers, permanent prohibition on serving as an officer or director of any California registered entity." She looked at Grant. 11 years, permanent revocation of peace officer certification by the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training. The court notes that the defendant used his law enforcement position not to protect the public, but to obstruct the investigation of crimes he was actively committing. The court finds no mitigating circumstance that warrants leniency. She closed the folder. "We are adjourned." I walked out of the courthouse into the October afternoon, the particular flat gold light that Los Angeles produces in autumn, the kind that makes everything look temporarily permanent, like a photograph of itself. Marcus was beside me, his briefcase in one hand, already checking his phone with the focused efficiency of a man for whom resolution is simply the point at which the next matter begins. "It's done," he said. "Almost," I said. He looked at me. "What's left?" I thought about a watch sitting in the drawer of my desk, about a boy who drove a used pickup truck to job sites every morning and was learning slowly what it meant to build something without a net underneath him. "One more thing," I said. "My wife Eleanor used to say that forgiveness is not something you decide to give. It is something you discover. She said one ordinary morning when you reach for the familiar weight of an old anger and find that it is no longer there and something quieter has moved into the space it used to occupy. Something that does not have a name yet, but feels in the particular way of things that have earned their place like it belongs. I discovered it on a Saturday afternoon in late September, approximately 11 months after a night in my living room when everything that needed to fall apart finally did. I was in my workshop when I heard the sound of tires on the gravel driveway, a sound I recognized not by pitch or pattern, but by what it was not. It was not the quiet precision of a new car on a clean driveway. It was the particular sound of a working vehicle, a truck that had spent its weekdays on job sites and accumulated the small, honest sounds of use. I set down the hand plane I had been working with and went to the window. Ethan's pickup was old and dusty and had a crack in the passenger side mirror that he had not gotten around to fixing. He had bought it 3 months after the sentencing, with his own money from a man in Van Nuys who had advertised it on Craigslist for $6,000. He had not called to ask my opinion of the purchase. He had simply bought it, driven it to the job site in Burbank, where he was currently working as a site supervisor under the oversight of a project manager 12 years his junior, and used it every day since. He got out of the truck and reached back into the cab for something. When he turned around, he was carrying a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil, held in both hands with the careful grip of someone transporting something that matters. He had not called ahead. Dot opened the front door. Before he reached it, she had a quality of appearing at doorways at precisely the right moment that I had long since stopped trying to explain, and looked at the casserole dish with an expression that on her face constituted visible emotion. "You made something," she said. Ethan said. "Chicken and rice, my grandmother's recipe." He looked slightly uncertain for the first time since he had gotten out of the truck. I might have gotten the paprika wrong. Dot took the dish from him without ceremony and headed for the kitchen. "Come in," she said over her shoulder. "Your father is in the workshop pretending he didn't hear you pull up." I was already in the hallway when he came through the door. He looked different than he had 11 months ago. Not older exactly, something more specific than that. He had the particular quality of a man who has been carrying his own weight for long enough that it no longer shows as effort. It had simply become the way he stood. He was also, I noticed, wearing work boots that had not been cleaned recently, which told me more about the state of his week than any conversation could have. He looked at me. I looked at him. "I didn't call," he said. "I noticed," I said. "I thought if I called I'd—" He stopped, started again. "I just thought I'd come." "All right," I said. "Come in." We were in the kitchen, Dot heating the casserole dish and making the small sounds of a woman who is pretending to be focused on a task so that two other people can have a conversation when we heard the small thunder of feet on the hallway floor. Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was 4 years and 11 months old, hair still damp from whatever had happened to it earlier in the day, wearing a shirt with a dump truck on it that he had apparently selected himself, on the grounds that dump trucks were, in his current estimation, superior to all other vehicles. He had been staying with Ethan full-time since the Los Angeles County Family Court granted Ethan sole legal and physical custody 6 months ago, recognizing him as Noah's presumed father under California Family Code, the man who had been present at every bedtime, every birthday, every ordinary morning for 4 years. I had supported the process by establishing an independent educational trust, administered by Marcus Reed's firm, structured so that no future claim by Vanessa or Grant could touch it. Noah looked around the kitchen with the comprehensive survey of a child assessing a new situation. Then he saw me. "Grandpa," he announced with the specific declarative certainty of a child for whom this was simply a fact about the world, like the color of the sky or the existence of dump trucks. He crossed the kitchen at full speed, which for a child his age was faster than adults tend to anticipate, and crashed into my legs with both arms. I crouched down and held him. He smelled like grass and something vaguely crayon adjacent, and the particular clean smell of a child who had been recently and imperfectly washed. He was solid and warm and entirely present in the way children are, the way adults mostly forget how to be. Over his shoulder, I saw Ethan watching us. His hands were in his pockets and his jaw was working slightly, and his eyes were doing the thing they had been doing periodically since the night he sat in my study at 3 a.m, filling and then being controlled, and then filling again, the ongoing negotiation of a man who has decided he is allowed to feel things, but has not entirely made his peace with showing them. Noah pulled back and held up both hands to show me something, a small wooden truck, the paint slightly worn on the roof of the cab, where small hands had been holding it for nearly a year. "I still have it," he said with great seriousness. "I can see that," I said. "It's the best truck," he said. "I believe you," I said. He considered this settled and ran back to Ethan, wrapping both arms around Ethan's leg and then pivoting to look at me from that position, as if confirming we were all in the same place. Dinner was in the end not bad. The paprika was, as Ethan had suspected, slightly wrong, too much of it in a way that made the dish warmer than the recipe had likely intended. But Dot ate 2 servings and said nothing critical, which from her constituted a compliment of the highest order. And Noah ate everything on his plate and asked for more rice, and the kitchen had the particular sound of an occupied house, the small noises of people and utensils, and the ordinary business of a meal that does not have a name or an occasion but simply is. After Ethan helped Dot clear the table while I put Noah to bed, it took 3 requests, 2 glasses of water, and 1 extended negotiation about whether the wooden truck could sleep in the bed or had to stay on the nightstand. A compromise was reached before the boy finally went still. One hand curled around the truck's cab, his breathing deepening into the total unconscious peace of the very young. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. Then I went to my study. I opened the top drawer of my desk. The watch was where it had been for 11 months, sitting in its original leather box, the clasp closed the crystal clean, because Dot polished it once a month without being asked. and without commenting on it. I picked it up and carried it to the living room. Ethan was standing at the window, looking out at the backyard where the garden lights had come on in the early dark. He turned when he heard me come in. I set the watch on the coffee table between us. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the gesture did not already contain the 35 years it represented, and the 11 months it had waited, and the distance between the man who had carried it to a party expecting to give it to his son, and the man standing here now, who understood finally what it meant to receive it. Ethan looked at the watch for a long time. Then he looked at me. His jaw was tight and his eyes were bright, and he pressed his lips together once hard before he trusted himself to speak. "I'll earn it," he said. "I promise." I looked at him, at the work boots with the dried mud on the laces, at the faint calluses that had been forming on his palms over the last 6 months, at the particular way he was standing, which was the way a man stands when he has been carrying his own weight long enough that it has become simply the way he stands. "I know you will," I said. From the kitchen, Dot said something we could not quite hear, and Noah called out from his room. Something about the truck, a question about whether trucks dreamed, and the house filled briefly with the small, ordinary sound of people in the same place at the same time, which is not a complicated thing, and is not a thing that can be taken for granted. I looked at the watch on the table between us. "Come back next Saturday," I said. "Bring that chicken dish again. Get the paprika right this time." Ethan laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that arrives without permission, the kind that means something without meaning to. "Yes, sir," he said. Outside, the garden lights held the backyard in their quiet, steady glow. Somewhere on the street, a neighbor's sprinklers came on. The city moved around us the way it always did, indifferent and continuous and entirely unaware that in this particular house on this particular Saturday, something that had been broken for almost a year was not yet repaired, because repair is the wrong word, too clean and too final, but was at least at last being rebuilt, the right way this time. I have told you this family story because I needed to say it out loud before I could let it go. For 61 years, I believed the strongest thing a man could do was carry the weight in silence. I was wrong. Silence is not strength. It is just silence, and silence leaves the people you love no map for finding you when things fall apart. If you see yourself in Ethan choosing the easier loyalty over the harder truth, do not do what we did. Do not wait for the collapse to begin the conversation. The people worth keeping can handle honesty. The ones who cannot were never truly staying. This family betrayal did not destroy us. It clarified us. It burned away everything that was not real and left only what was a man in muddy work boots learning to carry his own weight. A grandfather who finally put down what he had held too long, and a child asleep with a wooden truck who loved us anyway. I believe God allows certain storms not to punish us, but to show us what remains when everything built on the wrong foundation finally gives way. This family story of family betrayal is mine. I hope it is useful to yours. If this family story reached you, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe if you want more. I read every word you leave behind. Thank you for staying until the very end. Note stories on this channel include fictional elements built for reflection and education. If that is not for you, no hard feelings, and please find content that serves you better.